Debbie makes landfall as a hurricane, a potential once-in-a-thousand-year rainfall event.
There's definitely water inside that house.
Millions face catastrophic rainfall as the storm moves across Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas.
Worst case scenario would literally be our city underwater, and that thought terrifies me.
The CBS Evening News starts now. Good evening, everyone. I'm Major Garrett. Nora is on assignment. Tonight, Tropical Storm Debbie is slamming much of the southeast with historic rainfall and catastrophic flooding. More than a foot of rain has already fallen near Tampa, along with 6 feet of storm surge along Florida's Big Bend. With the storm expected to stall, even more flooding is anticipated over the next several days in Georgia and the Carolinas. At least 5 deaths have been reported, 1 in Georgia, 4 in Florida, and that includes a 13-year-old boy who died when a tree fell on his mobile home. A state of emergency has been declared in Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina after Debbie made landfall as a hurricane this morning. We have team coverage, and CBS's Tom Hansen starts us off from Florida's West Coast. Tom, good evening.
Hey there, Major. Good evening to you. We're in Horseshoe Beach, one of the communities that really took the brunt of this storm. You know, we had to go through police checkpoints to get here, and that's where we met a couple who decided to ride it out. This is their home. Take a look at the damage. You can see the second floor balcony is almost completely stripped. They say that it sounded like a firecracker when the storm hit. It's just one example of the power of Debbie. When Hurricane Debbie roared ashore in Horseshoe Beach early this morning with pounding rain and 80-mile-per-hour winds, Jim and Sally Johnson were bracing for the worst.
The water was between here to here.
In a matter of hours, the home where they planned to retire was slammed by storm surge.
The house was shaking like we're in a plane in turbulence through most of the storm.
It's the second time in less than a year this tiny fishing village has been hit by hurricanes. A 1-2 punch from Idalia and now Debbie.
We just did not expect this again. You know, we're just shaking our heads over it.
It's sad, but we have a saying here. It's called Horseshoe Strong. And we help each other.
Much of the town is barricaded off so crews can clear the roads to allow residents back in. Those who stayed will be sitting in the dark tonight without electricity. Today, Governor Ron DeSantis said the state is mobilizing 3,500 National Guardsmen.
The Florida Division of Emergency Management has completed 435 storm-related missions, and they are currently in the process of completing another 400 more.
Debbie's next stop is Georgia.
I'm Cristian Benavides in Savannah, Georgia, which is already under a state of emergency. Residents here are bracing for impact and gathering sandbags at the very last minute, with Debbie just hours away. The storm is expected to dump historic levels of rainfall, up to 30 inches. City officials have implemented a curfew beginning at 10 p.m. tonight.
Your message to people that are taking this lightly?
Don't.
55 years.
You've lived here your whole life?
My whole entire life, yes.
Have you ever gotten sandbags for a storm?
No, this is my first time.
Savannah resident Vera Young's home flooded just last week during a thunderstorm. She's putting up sandbags and is gearing up to hunker down.
What goes through your mind hearing that it could potentially be up to 30 inches of rain in some areas?
Scary, scared. Yeah, just scared. You know, doing all we can to prepare.
That thunderstorm that flooded her home lasted just an hour, so you can only imagine what hours and hours of rainfall could potentially do to her home, to her neighborhood. We have been seeing some of those outer bands here, and at this point, downtown Savannah looks like a ghost town as people rush to head home before curfew. Major?
Cristian Benavides, thank you. For more on this historic rain and where Tropical Storm Debbie is headed next, I want to bring in CBS Miami's chief meteorologist, Ivan Cabrera. Ivan, good evening.
Yeah, Major, Debbie was a hurricane earlier this afternoon as it hit the Big Bend of Florida. Now it's a tropical storm. This is where it is right now. Let's take a look at where it is along the I-10 corridor. And even before it made landfall, it was already dumping incredible amounts of rain. Look at that rain shield that extends for hundreds of miles. That's going to be the story with this storm. Let's take a look at the numbers have already fallen here across Florida. anywhere from 10 to as much as 15 inches of rainfall. So where is Debbie going as a tropical storm? Take a look at this track. This is what's amazing. It's not going anywhere fast. It is going to be moving at a snail's pace over the next several days, all the while dumping very heavy rainfall across a region. In fact, as we've been talking about here, we could be measuring the totals from Debbie in feet come the end of the week. Take a look at our latest projection here, anywhere from 10 to as much as 2 feet. I think some areas of Major are going to see isolated totals up to 3 feet of rainfall by the end of the week.
Up to 3 feet, hard to imagine. Ivan Cabrera, thank you so much. Turning now to the stock market, it began the week with a massive sell-off. Friday's downbeat jobs report and growing fears of a recession sent all three main indexes tumbling, with both the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ falling at least 3%. CBS's Jolene Kent reports from Wall Street, which suffered its worst day in almost 2 years.
The closing bell ending a bruising day on Wall Street.
I got you. You win. I got you.
Stocks plunged on fears the U.S. economy is slowing and the Federal Reserve isn't acting quickly enough. All three major indexes closed in the red, the NASDAQ leading the declines as once white-hot tech stocks like Apple, Nvidia, and Meta tanked.
Our market probably moved too far too fast, and it's now pulling back into a range where it actually should be.
Fears of a U.S. recession triggered turbulence overseas. Japan's Nikkei posted its worst day since 1987, dropping over 12% on Monday. Driving the U.S. sell-off, a weaker than expected jobs report, a higher unemployment rate, and worries that consumers are pulling back on spending, which accounts for roughly 2/3 of the economy.
There's a generalized concern that the economy is slowing down faster than expected.
CBS News business analyst Jill Schlesinger says investors should not panic. Compared to this time last year, all three indexes are still up at least 9%.
Today looks like sort of a normal slowdown. We've been here, we've gotten through it, and if you're a long-term investor and if you're just a consumer in the economy, know that we'll get to the other side of this.
Last week, the Federal Reserve chose not to cut interest rates, meaning it's still very expensive to get a new car loan, a new home loan, and credit card debt, of course. But we did see mortgage rates start to float to their lowest level since February, Major.
Jolene, is there any indication this market volatility could prompt the Fed to take emergency action?
Major, it is highly unlikely that the Fed will call an emergency meeting. We do expect that previously scheduled meeting in mid-September, though, to yield an interest rate cut. It's just now a matter of how much, Major.
With us tonight from Wall Street, Jolene Kent, thank you so much. Tonight, a legal defeat for Google and a court ruling that could send shockwaves across the internet. A federal judge ruled today that Google has been operating as an illegal monopoly and exploiting its widely used search engine to crush competition. This included paying cell phone makers like Apple and Samsung to make Google its default search engine. The judge will now decide what changes and penalties should be imposed to reverse the damage and restore a more competitive landscape. Google and its parent company, Alphabet, plan to appeal. There is intrigue and intense speculation tonight in the hours before Vice President Kamala Harris is expected to announce her running mate. It is her first big move since locking up the Democratic nomination following President Biden's historic decision to drop out of the race. CBS's Nancy Cordes is at the White House.
The public saw Vice President Harris just once today in this picture released by the White House of a meeting in the Situation Room about Mideast tensions. But behind the scenes, she's been busy interviewing at least 3 VP candidates yesterday at her home in D.C. Their cars were seen coming and going as Harris prepares to announce her pick tomorrow. And though they've been chatty in the past,
I'm just am who I am and put it out there.
Now the top contenders have gone mostly silent.
I got nothing for you, man.
Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro is the one who has gotten the most incoming from the 2 men on the Republican ticket.
If she picks Shapiro, she's going to lose the Palestinian vote, and that's fine.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz was also singled out by Trump's VP nominee J.D. Vance last week.
I don't know anything about him. He seems really angry.
Even before tomorrow's announcement, a new CBS News poll finds Democratic enthusiasm is on the rise. 85% of Democrats now say they definitely plan to vote, bringing them closer to Republicans than they've been all year. Harris and Trump are now essentially tied. though voters are still far more likely to say Trump's policies will leave them financially better off. Trump called today's stock market drop the Kamala crash at least 5 times on Truth Social today. It's a phrase he started testing out last week.
If Harris wins this election, you will quickly have a Kamala economic crash.
Nancy joins us now from the White House. So is the Harris campaign reacting to that economic attack from former President Trump?
Major, I actually just got a statement from the Harris campaign a few minutes ago. They say, quote, what middle-class families need is steady economic stewardship, not chaotic, ranting lies. Donald Trump oversaw some of the worst days in the stock market in history. Major, the economy is going to be one of the major fault lines between these two campaigns over the next 3 months.
With a rapid response, Nancy Cordes at the White House. Thank you. Now to some breaking news out of the Middle East. Several U.S. personnel were injured today, none critically, when 2 rockets were fired from a modified box truck at the Al-Assad air base in Iraq. No group has claimed responsibility. The White House says the president and vice president have been briefed. Today's attack comes amid growing fears of an all-out war in the Middle East, with Iran and its proxies threatening to strike back against Israel for the recent assassinations of senior Hamas and Hezbollah leaders. The U.S. is beefing up its military presence in the region, sending additional warships and fighter jets. CBS's Deborah Pata is in East Jerusalem.
The war drums are getting louder. Following Ismail Haniyeh's assassination, Tehran says Israel must be punished for what it calls its cowardly attack on Iranian soil. Both Israel and Iran say they don't want this to escalate, but nobody wants to be the first to take a step back. Former Israeli diplomat to the U.S., Alon Pincus.
And most worrying is a coordinated, the so-called 360-degree attack. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iran from the east, the Houthis in western Yemen from the south, Hamas in both Gaza and the West Bank. So Israel will be encircled.
And where does America sit in all of this, and what should they be doing?
The last thing that America wants is a scenario in which they are dragged into the conflict.
U.S. General Michael Kurilla helped coordinate the defense of Israel during the Iranian attack in April, when more than 300 missiles and drones were fired, and was back here today meeting with Israel's defense minister. The U.S. still believes the best way to prevent this from spiraling out of control is a ceasefire in Gaza. In weekend protests, families and friends of hostages accused Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of choosing escalation over a deal. As the world's attention is focused on Iran, in Gaza, they count their dead every day. The remains of more than 80 Palestinians were returned today after Israel took some of the bodies to check if any hostages were among them. These are the nameless dead, waiting for loved ones to claim them.
There are high levels of anxiety here, but for many Israelis, life simply goes on. There's still an all-out effort internationally to prevent this from escalating, but one mistake could be lethal. Major?
Deborah Pata, thank you. Eye on America is next, with the future threat of tropical weather, not to the coastline, but to inland communities. We've been reporting on the potential for catastrophic flooding from Tropical Storm Debbie as it makes its way north. Some parts of Georgia and the Carolinas are predicted to get up to 2 feet of rain, which of course could mean big trouble far inland. In tonight's Eye on America, Mark Strassman has a cautionary tale of the threat that communities are facing now and in the future.
Hurricane Matthew sucker punched Lumberton, North Carolina.
We got you, sir. Stand them up, bro.
80 miles inland, no one saw 20 inches of rain coming.
Lumberton right now is going through a tough time.
The Lumber River crested 11 feet above flood stage. Flooding topped the levee and swamped the city in 2016.
I'm 6'3" and the waters were up to my chest.
We first met Jimmy Hunt 8 years ago, rescuing Matthew's flood victims.
It's pretty horrific what we've seen out here.
The fire chief remembers saving roughly 50 people.
Thank you, we're safe!
Most of them elderly.
10 to 15 minutes from the time the water came over till the water flooded their homes.
And once it flooded their homes, all bets were off.
All bets were off. It was just survival at that time.
2 years later, Hurricane Florence landed the 1-2 combo.
It really boggles the mind, right, that this same thing can happen again. Houses were underwater.
Brianna Goodwin, a community organizer here, remembers 24 inches of rain.
It was almost this feeling of being shell-shocked. Like, I see the water, I see the flooding, but is this real?
Lumberton learned the hard way twice. Today's hurricanes can target communities far from the coast. Gavin Smith, a professor at North Carolina State, studies the impact of climate change on natural disasters.
Not only the storms are becoming more intense, slower moving and water laden, but the populations are changing, and the people that are moving into these hazardous areas may not fully understand the impact.
Warmer oceans fuel storms. Our warmer atmosphere holds more moisture, and storms now routinely drop 10 to 15% more rain. Storms like Matthew,
You slept on the roof.
Slip on the roof.
which I covered back in 2016. Finding shelters for people gets harder when buildings have no power and no water. 8 years later, there could be a lot more Lumbertons going forward. In roughly 30 years, future storms could cause flood damage to more than 19 million properties, coastal and inland. And only about 1/4 of them would have flood insurance.
We literally lost everything.
Hurricane flooding ruined Sheila Moore's Lumberton house twice. She had no flood insurance. Church groups rebuilt her home both times.
You redid the whole house after Matthew, and along comes Florence.
Another one.
And what was that like?
That was devastating, too.
Even years later, Lumberton's only partially recovered, physically, psychologically.
You don't feel safe. You know that there's something that can destroy your home, and that's just not a very easy feeling to have.
It's a sea change. Today's hurricanes menace more than coastlines. For Eye on America, Mark Strassman in Lumberton, North Carolina. A plane crash lands on a golf course. The video and details next. Welcome back. The FAA is investigating the crash of a small plane on a golf course in Sacramento, California. Video of Sunday's crash shows the plane shortly after takeoff careening across a putting green and coming to a stop just outside the pro shop. Remarkably, there were no serious injuries. A New Mexico National Guard helicopter made a dramatic rescue Saturday, saving a climber who'd fallen down a cliff. The rescue team spotted the climber and hoisted them into a chopper within about 2 hours of receiving the emergency call. The injured climber was flown to a hospital in Albuquerque. An Olympic update is next with a photo finish so close you'll miss it if you blink.
This portion of the CBS Evening News is sponsored by BioFreeze, cooling relief for aches and pains.
Finally tonight, the U.S. women's gymnastics team went out in style and class at the Paris Olympics. Superstar Simone Biles took home a silver medal in her final event, the floor exercise. Teammate Jordan Childs grabbed the bronze, that after appealing her initial score. And the sportsmanship of the game, well, that was on full display as Biles and Childs showed their respect to Brazil's Rebeca Andrade, who took home the gold medal. And everyone, and I mean everyone, is still talking about the men's 100-meter final, which ended with one of the closest finishes in all Olympic history. Take a look at this photo composite of how American sprinter Noah Lyles crossed the finish line 0.005 of a second ahead of Jamaica's Kashane Thompson, earning the title fastest man in the world. For comparison, it takes 20 times longer than that winning margin for a human being to blink. For those keeping track at home, Team USA still leads the overall medal count with 78, and that includes 20 gold medals. And that is tonight's CBS Evening News. For Nora O'Donnell, I am Major Garrett. Good night.